What's up, Dragon Ball Super Family? I'm Legends Michael Carrick, and I'm so excited to bring you my deck list from this year's Nationals 2023 and World 2023. The deck list I'll be showing you is my Nationals list, but there's only three cards difference from my Worlds list, and I'll talk about what they are when we get there. So, I played Android 21, The Nature of Evil. She's been around for quite a bit now, and I think she's probably one of the scariest decks in the format. She's obviously has a very convenient leg up when playing against other blue or green decks, and she has a really good matchup into Universe 7, Sun Goku. For those who don't know what she can do, what's important is that on her backside, she's allowed to use your opponent's cards or battle cards and unisons as energy, tapping them for whatever color card they are to cast your Android 21 cards. So that's really cool. She's also able to untap or switch up to three of your opponent's battle or unison cards to active mode once per turn and draw a card, which of course gives you extra energy to use for. The trade-off though is that you can't play any cards through skills on your own turn, and uh, that results in you casting everything for its full cost, which is pretty cool and you kind of get used to it. There are some tricks you can do to mitigate this so it's not as like detrimental, but for the most part, uh, you're casting everything for generally about half its cost or less by using your opponent's stuff or stuff you give to your opponent. So as we start, I played three copies of Android 18 Measureless Strength. I actually went back and forth between two and three copies of this card. I hate this card in the deck. I think I used the Arrival effect once, maybe. I used the Activate main to discard and search maybe twice in the entire event. It's just not a great effect, and this is the best blue-green energy that we have. So most of the time, I'm just playing this as a blue-green energy that can do something in other matchups. So if the matchup is too fast for you, like it's Jiren, then that's like kind of where I would want to use this to look for a second cop or to look for a super combo instead of just sitting dead in my hand and uncombable. But versus other decks that are like kind of mid-range to slow, even if I saw two of these in my hand, I would just charge one and then keep the second one for a charge for the next turn, just like plan for the future. The probably the most important card of this format is this Pilaf Shumai. Versus U7, it's just critical to have on turn one, so you can reduce the amount of value they get when they try to combo. Versus Green Gohan, it's also critical to have in the early game. When they go to attack with the Vegeta that came out of the Hyperbolic Time Chamber, you can counterattack it. And then after their auto goes off to combo the Trunks and gain crit, then your auto will go off, drawing you a card and removing crit from the Vegeta. And then also now you can bottom deck their combo piece, so they have to give you another card to be able to generate that Z energy that they so want to be able to continue their natural line of play. So it's just huge. Then you can just combo this card afterwards, so it doesn't die to the Goku Z card that they're about to play, and then still take the damage, helping you get to your awakening without having to lose the life to crit. So that's just huge. It's also big in the mirror match. You just play it on turn one, and now neither of you are attacking in the opening and waiting for to see who makes the first move after the early turns. And then just versus like a couple rogue matchups like Red Gohangs, it's really big. They want to open up with their destroyed West City. So you just make that card cost one extra card from their hand as well. So huge card in the format. Um, and we move into what I think is the best card in the deck. Uh, Pan Glimpse of Talent. I think if there's any card in this deck that's worth banning, it would be this one. Um, this card single-handedly equals two energy in this deck, all or three sometimes, because you'll play it, give it to your opponent, and then you use it to cast your Z card, and then you'll untap it with your leader skill, and now this and your Z card is worth two energy, like available to your 21 plays. So I think that's a little unfair for a deck to be able to use. It also is the singular reason why the 21 SCR is just so much more powerful in this deck. Um, if your opponent leaves you with only one creature on their field or like three creatures because they're trying to avoid you from getting the max value of the heal, you can play a couple pans and suddenly you're healing for the max value. It also turns plays like Total Audacity into a draw 3 rather than a draw 2. The card just does a lot in this deck, and I think if there was any way to like balance this deck to where it would kind of be more in line with other blue decks or more in line with other decks in its tier, is just reducing pan to 1 or maybe just getting rid of it altogether. And then I do play a full suite of Android 18 Speedy Substitution. I wanted to make sure my turn 1 was just as good as possible. I ended up playing a 53 card list because there were just so many techs I wanted to fit in for this event, for this like major event. And playing 4 copies of Speedy Sub not only gives me a immediate target to sub out if I need to like side something out and I needed an extra tool, but it also makes it so my deck is really consistent on turn 1, right? Like consistency is the name of the game when you're playing 9+ rounds of an event. And so just always finding an opener to make sure that first energy is used. If I can't find like Pilaf Shumai, like this is just a great backup. And then mid to late game, if you ramp the SCR, this is a good way to pick it up. Or if you ramp like an 8 drop that you really want to pick up, like this is a really cool way to fix it. After early game though, this card kind of just becomes energy, which is also just as useful, really. A full suite of both floodgates. This deck is very much like Gamma in the fact that it tries to floodgate your opponent every turn. This floodgate is turned on immediately by turn 3 because you generally have a Z card on the field, whether or not you have 3Z energy. So that's really convenient. It's also an Android, so it's searchable by everything in the deck. This floodgate, more often than not, is actually just energy, right? Like it comes down usually as the first or second energy, maybe even the third energy. And then later you can pick it up with Zeno if you need it, or you can pick it up with Speedy Sub. But it's just so hard to use this card. It costs a lot of energy commitment, and it's really kind of a soft floodgate into the game. So although 25k means it doesn't get hit by a lot of counterplays, and then you can actually play it on your turn if you need to, just to clear a barrier threat. So that's really important too. 3 copies of Total Audacity. I actually am playing 4 copies, but I wanted to have the fourth one in the side because I wanted to fit some side deck tools in the main in preparation for Top Cut. This card's amazing. You try to resolve as many as you can throughout the game. Obviously, there's a really nutty line where your opponent leaves like 1 creature on the field. Like even if it's not like this is like their creature, just pretend it's their creature. You play the pan, you give them the pan for 1 energy, right? And then you tap the 2 to create your Z card, wherever that is. And then you use your leader to untap those 2 cards. Draw a card, and then you tap them both down with the Z card plus 1 more of your own energy to play this card. So for 2 mana, for 2 energy, you effectively got 3 draws, not including your leader skill, and then a double strike 20k body. Like I think like Pan just pushes this card over the edge. It really just does that for a lot of the plays in this deck, right? So yeah, I couldn't see myself playing any less than 4. Obviously, you can pretty liberally combo them off or charge them because you probably will only resolve 2, maybe 3 in a game, but like that's not a good enough reason for me not to play 4. 4 copies of Android 21 Ceaseless Despair. This is just like the craziest card I've ever read in a card game. The only way this card could have been crazier is if it had deflect or sorry, if it had barrier, right? But like it board clears, it uses your opponent to cover at least 3 of its energy usually by the time if you need to play this card, and then it also punish taxes your opponent for trying to like fight back. So that's really terrible. And then it's of course just great pressure, 25k dual attack. Of course you have to be wary if you're going to play it into decks that can clear it. Like yellow, if they have an energy up, you can't play this card because they can final flash it. Like blue, if they have more than 2 energy up, you can't play it because they can like Sun Gohan SGR, like little things like that, right? But if this card gets to play, it just swings the game so hard. Even if you don't actually deal damage with it, just by board clearing with it and then like passing, you get your 5 energy back. Like your opponent has to answer this card, and then they also have to answer whatever like plays you have since you have all of your energy back. Um, and then of course, like just icing on the top, it's also a 0 for 10k. So like it's really hard to all in this deck early game. My super combo spread was 3 Android 8s and 1 Zeno Edge of Space. The Zeno really was in case I ramped a black card or a green card or a mono green card, mono black card, or the SCR. This was just extra protection. Also, I found myself tapping out on turn 2 a lot just to force the ramp. And so if my opponent decided to push, it was comfortable to have a Zeno with me to save the awakening, or if I needed to do a like awaken Zeno Bean Sun Gohan SGR play, like this was there. And then of course the this deck doesn't really feel like a control deck to me, especially not a hand control deck to me. It really feels more like a mid-range deck. Like you do a lot of fighting in this deck, right? Like you have early game double strikes, you have a lot of attackers, your leader is strong in the early game, like so you can really push your opponent. So I really wanted super combos that drew, so I can force some of these double strikes early, and then threaten to close out the game. If you think about it, you really only need to do 7 damage in this deck, and then the last damage you can just burn for. So just having a super combo that like replaces itself to get there, and it's searchable because it's an android. It's the only reason why we play this one specifically. Um, that it was just too convenient. Plus, if somebody does push you, like you're only really weak to hyper aggro. Even though I just described this deck as like a mid-range deck, you're like really weak to hyper aggro because your turn two is kind of telegraphed and taps you out every game. So this is just a nice way to maintain the hand count while surviving those early aggro turns. For extra cards, I played one copy of UI Goku's Kamehameha. It's one of those cards like if you have it in your hand, it feels really good because you feel safe from a big combo attack. If you or like if you just need to push that extra damage on a swing, like this is obviously 15k and replace itself is really significant. A lot of times I'll play the 8 drop and I'll only take 4 of my own energy because I have a Z card to tap for the 5th blue energy. So that leaves me 1 extra energy that I want to spend before I pass my turnover. So this is just a good way to push a 40k double strike and use all 5 energy efficiently. I chose not to play 2. I know a lot of lists were contemplating with 2, but this card feels terrible if you have 2 copies in your hand, especially if you're getting comboed out on, like, and like you were already tapped out when it started. Like this could have been any 5k, right? Or like if you're trying to go in and combo all out, like it doesn't untap the energy when you go in, so that's really dangerous too. And then like worst case scenario, if you do ramp a black or a green card, like a mono black or a mono green card, you can't even use this card anymore for its full effect. So that's why we really just played it at 1. 2 copies of Bean. This was really my respect for Red. It was showing and testing that like Jiren just dominated this deck. So a couple beans really made the difference in that matchup. And if you were able to watch the matchup I had versus Ivan in top 4 of nationals, you can see how impactful just Bean was. It's just like a mini floodgate that gets you out of early game aggro 15ks. Of course, the full suite of dimension magics. Not much to be said about that. Something to note in this deck: you can't activate extra cards on your front side. So so you kind of have to be comfortable with going to 3 life early game. Not to hold your awakening. I mean, obviously that's convenient, but like mainly just like if your opponent slams like a big 30k triple strike or something like that, you can't get out of it at 5 life, right? You're just gonna have to eat it. So that's just something you just have to deal with in this deck. So don't make that mistake of like leaving energy up on turn. That's really why you tap it on turn 2. There's nothing you can really do to defend yourself on turn 2 if you did nothing, right? Defending friends is your only real counterattack, and then Pilaf's not a great counterattack because it doesn't actually counterattack. So like you just tap out on turn 2, feel comfortable playing at 2/3 life if your opponent hits you with a double or triple from 5 life, and then you can just have this up after you awaken. There's also some argument to be made for like if you're at 5 life and you go to play your 2 drop Z extra on turn 2, you can even take the life, stay at 4 life, and then just don't awaken. So that's also a cool play. Until you take the first hit, right? Then you just awaken and do all your shenanigans to get out of it. 2 copies of Oob, focused full strength blow. This is actually like the cheapest card we can play in this deck that's a threat. And it's only because it reduces its own cost down to 2, so you're not playing it for any skill. It's super cool threat. Comes a big double strike out of nowhere. It's a 0 for 5k. It's kind of like an extra copy of Total Audacity, but being way taller and having an extra additional tax if your opponent decides to counterattack, as long as you set it up appropriately. Um, I noticed throughout the weekend people just stopped playing around this card. I feel like blue kind of fell off the map as the national season started. Like people were just concerned about playing against U7 and Green Gohan, so I think that's what people just tested against the majority of the time. And everybody just like casually had 2 or 3 Z energy all the time, so this card came down pretty frequently. This was the reason I played blue. 2 copies of Sun Gohan Power Reclaimed. It was just a guaranteed answer to the 6 drop in U7. Um, so that was the real reason I played this. I didn't want to lose to U7 because they had like an infinite 6 drop attacker, right? And it's also more efficient than like petrification if I were playing a black deck. Also in blue I get to untap energy pretty freely, so I get access to this, and you can do it in pretty sneaky ways. Like you saw I'm playing the Zeno, so you can like Zeno Bean into this, or you can like Bean Zeno into or Bean into this, or even D Magic and then have 2 up and then Bean into this. Like there's just so many ways to shut down their turn. with this. And then of course you get presented like gifted a triple attacker afterwards, and you can just attack twice with it and then leave it up and combo it off on your opponent's next turn. That way it's like 5k and you can still use the auto. So this is probably one of my favorite cards of blue in general. Some main board tech for top 16. So I went into this event. I kind of like most events. I kind of want to prepare for Top Cut playoffs because that's when it gets really difficult, right? Like if your deck isn't prepared to play against stuff in Top Cut, then your deck's not doing well anyway. So I played two Wavering Wills for the green matchup. It shockingly has some application in U7 when they play the 4-drop. You can Wavering Will it in window 2 so they don't get a chance to tap it to deal 1 damage to you, so that's really convenient too. But it's really there to hit Son Gohan and Son Goku Father-Son Solidarity. I think that's the name of the card. One copy of Hit. This is another main deck tech. I mistakenly thought Mechikabra would be more popular at the event than it was, and I had this like fantasy of being able to flip my opponent's leader after they had used all 7 Dragon Balls but didn't get to Z Awaken yet, so that's what this was for. And then it also solos the mirror match. If you get your board to like a halfway decent position, and then you get to 5 or 6 energy, you can just play hit for 3 and then kill your or play hit for 2, like -2 for the hit, and then kill your opponent. Or like if you're blessed and you're able to develop hit the turn before and you can defend it from the attacks, then you're definitely beating your opponent. Because if you flip down your opponent in the mirror, they can no longer use the dimension magics or beans. Especially if they were relying on like using your creatures to play their full power counter, like it's significantly harder now to play full power counter. Almost impossible actually to play full power counter because they can't even use their own Z cards as energy anymore. So that's actually really big in the mirror. One copy of Boo. This card's insane. One copy of this SCR. Card's really unfair. I think it does a little too much. I think probably the part that like goes over the edge for this card is the fact that it clears any unison regardless of markers or specified cost. One copy of Bad Omen. I saw a lot of lists playing multiple copies of Bad Omen. Maybe I'm just like too fresh on the deck, but like this card just seems terrible to me, right? Like it's so dead until that exact moment at the end of the game when you're ready to win the game. I don't want to be getting rid of my energy that I'm working so hard to like gather throughout the game in the mid game. Right? I really just want this for that final damage. Like if your opponent's at 2 life or 1 life, that's when you really want this card. 2 life because if they're tapped down, they're relying on one of those counterattack blockers. Like you can play this and force them out of that line. And now they're just stuck with the cards in their hand. And then of course 1 life is obvious. It just deals the 1 damage. One copy of Turning the Tide. This one's kind of a given. It's just really good. It's a good game closer for the deck. If your opponent ever taps down out of 2 energy, like past 2 energy rather, then you can just close out the game. I think this card needed to be banned a long time ago, and so here we are in 2024, still playing with Turning the Tide. This is my final copy or final card for like a main deck respect. Um, so like I just talked about how powerful Turning the Tide is, and of course I didn't want to be that person that got caught in game one of Top Cut or Worlds without an answer to Turning the Tide. And there was even the possibility I could bait my opponent into playing Turning the Tide in game one, and then just blow them out with Jiren. So that's kind of like why I mained it. There's also like you do get a pretty significantly large hand in this deck, and if your opponent ever plays the Goku 2-drop, that like makes you shuffle cards down. You can also respond with Jiren to that, and you don't lose those cards anymore. So that's pretty cool. And then finally, there's a really cool line versus Expert 21. A lot of people never think about this, but you can actually cast this into their Hellfire. I think it's called Hellfighter. It's like the Super 17 from their energy that plays 3 21s. If they or 3 androids from their energy, if they play the 18s, they choose to play the 18s, or even if if that's all they have to play, like you can respond with Jiren, and those 18s can't shuffle cards back into your deck anymore. Yeah, you still have to deal with 3 25k attackers, but it's just a cool way to like preserve 2 other cards and draw a card to like defend against that. Notably, in Worlds, I didn't actually play the second bean because I didn't. There was going to be no red at Worlds, and that was it. The second bean was traded out for a extra Deborah in the main for my Worlds list. Before we get to the Z deck, because that's probably just the most interesting thing, we'll talk about the side deck that I brought. So I brought one copy of Android 16 Limiter Disengaged. This was, so in testing, if you'll notice the Floodgate, like our most popular Floodgate, the Defending Friends, doesn't affect Unisons, right? And so And then Nimbus was really popular, and Forbidden Power were really popular this format. So people were just bringing in like unison, multi-attacker unisons, especially the Gohan Z Fighter in U7 as a way to like beat this deck. And then there were a couple green Gohan players that were relying on the 3-drop Frieza as a finisher into this deck. So this was a cool way to arrival into those both of those win cons, and then like gotcha them, right? Like you'll activate battle, kill itself to remove a marker, and then now you're out of that threat, and you invested 2 cards and 1 energy, and they invested 1 card but 3 energy. And so generally their turn passes if you can snap this on them. It's also a 0 for 5 in hand, so worst case if they actually aren't playing those in that matchup, like there was I matched in a U7 once and he obviously wasn't playing Unison, and I matched up in Green Gohan once and he wasn't playing Unison, but so I just comboed this thing off as soon as I realized that he wasn't actually playing Unison. It just cools the energy. 1 copy of Tapion, Savior from Another Time. This was just my respect to Gogeta. I think if you went into this event without a response to the Gogeta SCR, I think you were doing it wrong. Despite the fact that the Gogeta SCR like wasn't like the Gogeta as a deck hasn't been very popular leading into nationals, but I think you just didn't want to be caught without a way to beat that. But going to Worlds, I didn't side either of these. That's just like knowledge, right? Like we knew nobody was playing Gogeta going to Worlds, just because like none of the Worlds competitors really like that deck. And then there was only one U7 player, and I didn't know his list, so I didn't want to side 1 card for 1 person. It just didn't seem reasonable. 1 copy of Perfect Force Cell. This is just an answer to like Cooler, the Mirror Match, anything that goes long. Like U7, it's another good answer for. Especially because if you do decide to play that matchup pretty slowly, like if they're not fighting you and they're just trying to stall out and you're not fighting them, like you can just wait till Perfect Force sell them and you just beat them out of the game with that. 3rd copy of Sun Gohan Power Reclaim. This is really for red and U7. 2 copies to Let the Battle Begin. I didn't really play enough unisons to warrant playing this thing in the main. It's really just good versus the mirror and U7. So I heavily expected the field to be more green Gohan in U7 than I did the mirror. But I ended up playing 3 mirrors throughout the weekend. An extra copy of Hit for the mirror and Mechikabra. 2 copies of Koitsukai for Cooler and the mirror. When I say for the mirror, it's to hit both Defending Friends and Total Audacity. 1 copy of Tragedy Overground for U7 and Cooler. My initial plan versus Cooler was just to ramp and stall out so I can play this card and then just kill them through it. 1 extra copy of Wavering for green decks. 1 extra copy of Sensu Bean for red decks. 2 copies of Deborah for red deck or for green decks. Um, and then notably, these 2 cards were a 3rd copy of Koitsukai in the side for Worlds, and a 3rd copy of Let the Battle Begin for Worlds. And there was a 3rd copy of Deborah for this bean for Worlds. And then finally, the last card that we played was the 4th copy of Total Audacity. In any matchup where I just felt like some of my main deck cards were just like not needed, like so Jiren's or Wavering Wills or like the extra copy of Bean, because I just wasn't playing into a matchup that required those, and I just found myself having extra space. The 4th Audacity came in, right? It's also super significant in the mirror because you're both playing blue or any blue matchup really. She can sometimes just cost 0 in a blue matchup, and that's when this card becomes really unfair. 0 energy, draw 2, double strike, 20k is really, really powerful. That also generates an extra energy for you going into the next turn since it creates a token. Finally, we'll talk about our extra deck. So obviously we had clone tokens. If you do decide to play this deck, I would get in the habit of like having these somewhere near you. Not these specific clone tokens, it's just clone tokens somewhere. Because a lot of people will play Total Audacity and then forget that it generates a token at the end of their opponent's turn. So like you really do want that token because it's a +1 energy for you. I played 2 copies of the 2-drop and 3 copies of the 4-drop. I was initially playing 3 and 3. This card's incredible. It's just an extra energy for you. So on turn 2, not only do you ramp an energy with the 4-drop, but they both become energy. She often becomes cleared because she's a blocker and people don't want to leave that on the field. She sometimes gets just cleared, so if she doesn't, great, you have an extra energy. If she does, you're going to want to be able to create more. She has a free +1 energy whenever you play Pan and your opponent has a creature on the board, because you give them the Pan, use their creature, and create this. Then you untap the Pan and their creature like I showed you earlier, and now you have 3 energy to play with. You went from your opponent just giving you 1 energy on the board to 3 energy on the board to play with. So that's pretty cool. So that for those reasons, I really wanted to play a third copy. And then like blockers, like the easiest way to clear blockers in this deck is just to tap them down to play this, right? Or to play this. So ultimately though, testing against red, I realized that I needed the space and I needed to have a cell. So there's the cell that was in just to beat red. It comes up occasionally versus the mirror match, but really it's just to beat red. It was to if I couldn't find SCR on turn three, by turn three, which is not a realistic wish because it's a one of, then I knew I needed something else to play on turn three to clear the board and pass with one energy up. So this was the answer for that. And then finally, the last card I played was Zamasu Prelude to Destruction. This card just it's like the coolest, neat little trick for this deck. You play this 4-drop right and you Z stack this card, and now you can use the activate main to copy the indestructible, so you have an indestructible blocker, which is really relevant versus any color that's not red and is uh but like versus like Meki Cabra, like they can't clear this till their turn four. Versus like yellow, they have to invest like a skill negate to clear it, which isn't great for them. And if they don't, they have to tap it every turn, which is like you're just committing one of their resources for them every turn. So this card was really cool. Um, I would definitely play it again. I didn't miss having it, like not having a Vegito. I didn't miss the Z extra. There were no times where I wish I had either of those cards. Like there are so many threats in this deck already that like I don't want to be tapping five for a threat, right? Like that's just so weird. If I'm gonna tap five for a threat, it's gonna be my 8-drop, which clears the board and then like punishes my opponent super hard if they try to fight back. And then like, or I'm like playing Oob and something else, which is just a better threat than Vegito. This is just a better version of barrier if you're trying to create like a chump blocker. So like Vegeta barrier can still be removed super easily. Indestructible is a little bit harder. And then the Z extra card, I did definitely didn't miss. There's no time that like if I have 3 energy up and I'm passing with 3, like that's a good time, right? Like I don't feel the need to like, oh, let me do something with my energy. Let's just create the Z extra that might come up later. No, if I pass a 3 up, now I can play like defending friends. I can draw an extra card with PLSU Mai. It makes it a lot easier to play cards like the full power counter. So, yeah. Long story short, the Z extra wasn't great in my opinion. So that's the full deck. I'm pretty sure it's 53 cards for the deck. I truly hope this deck doesn't make it for another format. I really enjoyed playing this deck. I think it was super fun to play. I think it is not a great experience to play against, given that it floodgates every single turn. I think it favors um, high skill. It has a high skill ceiling, given how much you have to plan for this deck, both playing against it and playing as it. So I don't think that's very helpful for like new players into the game, right? Like if you like, I think I can speak for everybody when I say when like unless you're playing like strictly a counter matchup in the deck, when you if you sit down across from Android 21 Nature of Evil, you get a little bit tense because you just know the matchup's going to be a little bit annoying. It's going to be hard to like figure out. It's probably something you don't practice very often, and so I just don't think it's great. And if I had any, if I could have any input on like how I think this deck could be fixed, I think Pan should just go, right? Like I think that card has been around long enough. The Piccolo not being able to play the Pan, it's whatever. Now the Piccolo's a 2 energy barrier dual attacker, which is good enough. Or just limit the Pan to 1. I think Pan is a little too powerful for the deck, and it enables some degeneracy for the deck. But yeah, so final shoutouts. Shout out to all the people I got to play with this year, and I got to hang out with at all these events that I got to attend. Um, Shout out to each one of you guys, man. You guys make playing this game so much fun, and that's why I still play the game. Is because I get to go out to these cool locations that I wouldn't have a reason to go out to otherwise. Meet people, talk to you guys about everything. Like we don't just talk about cards when I meet some of you guys. We talk about like anime or whatever you wanted to get for lunch or what we're gonna do for dinner or what exciting things we have coming up. Like that's the reason why traveling for card games is fun. So a shout out to you guys who keep coming out to these events and keep making them super fun to compete in. Of course, shout out to my boys at FOX PPG. Um, and shout out to my friends that were with me the entire step of the way. I will see you guys at the next event.